Coming up soon on Uncommon Sense, we will wish you a Happy New Year with G.K. Chesterton and his thoughts on the new year, New Year's resolutions. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. I'm Grettelyn Darkey, your host, and I'm joined here with my co-host, Albert Sines. Albert, how are you today?
Very well. Happy New Year to you and also to everyone out there in digital world. So yeah, good to be here in 2023.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Gonna have to figure out how to write that New Year as always. I'm always back in the old year every time I try to write it.
It was more problematic when I used to write more checks.
Right.
Those first checks, like for the first month, were always representative of the previous year, and that was always a pain. But I barely write checks anymore. So
yeah. Well, here we are. And this is, we'll stretch this segue into our discussion. We are going to be discussing Chesterton's essay, January 1, which is about the new year. And you could say that New Year's and year's time in general is an arbitrary and sort of a false man-made convention. And that is maybe technically true, but as if you will look in the description, we'll have a link to this essay. You can see that Chesterton rather disagrees and seems to think that the new year and the celebration of different times and seasons is actually very important and very special and something that should not be passed over lightly.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I think as a society, we have definitely made the new year about fireworks, the big ball dropping in Times Square, watching whatever program you want to watch that gets played multiple times depending on which time zone you're in. So it's not even really live. I mean, we do all these things that are very, secular, that are very sort of worldly, and we've sort of, I think, displaced what the new year really represents. And I think this essay that we're going to cover, Chesterton really sort of puts us back in our place.
Yes, agreed. One of the things he talks about is that it's important to remember that the new year is an opportunity to make a new start. And he has a beautiful section towards the end of the essay where he says, unless a particular man made New Year's resolutions, he would make no resolutions. Unless a man starts afresh about things, he will certainly do nothing effective. Unless a man starts on the strange assumption that he has never existed before, it is quite certain that he will never exist afterwards. Unless a man be born again, he shall by no means enter into the kingdom of heaven. Wonderful. As usual, Chesterton kind of taking a biblical passage that maybe we've heard a million times and has become somewhat stale, and at least for me, making it very fresh and new and helping me to see it in a new light.
Well, it's, again, Chesterton has a very particular way of looking at life. He doesn't look at it in a very simplistic way. But to go to your first set of quotes there, unless a man starts on the strange assumption that he has never existed before, it is quite certain that he will never exist afterwards. To sort of capture the thought that you have to understand that you as a creation were sort of willed into existence, and there was a time where you were not in existence. There is a time now that you exist because of something much greater. And if you recognize that, then you can exist afterwards, the afterlife, heaven, eternity. But if you give no credence to any of the creation of your life, then you're not going to be able to have the ultimate goal, the ultimate eternity. So, I mean, but what a wonderful sort of way to think about it. It's like, you've got to know you weren't here. Now you are here. You recognize that, you'll be okay.
Mm, beautiful. That's sort of the essence of Chesterton in many of his works, I think. So Albert just kind of gave you the lofty view of that quote, which I agree with. But I think there's also another way to look at it. So we all can sort of point to previous versions of ourselves. You say like the way I was when I was in college, the way I was when I was younger. Um, Most of us wouldn't go back there for any money in the world. But there's this idea that sort of not necessarily to reinvent yourself. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best way to think about it. But this idea that at a certain point, to do things that are good and beautiful, sometimes you have to sort of leave your failures and your hang-ups behind you, and you just have to kind of move forward into something fresh. And I think that's a very valuable insight, and it sort of points to the particular kind of optimism. I hesitate to say optimism because Chesterton didn't really like that word, but in the sense of hopefulness for a future of good things. You sort of have to be able to let go of previous mistakes to start over. So in that sense, in the new year, especially with resolutions, we sort of let go, hopefully, of some of the things that we are trying to fix, and then we work on them through the new year by trying to be better.
It feels like the way that society has created resolutions that we work ourselves into these sort of corners. Like, what's a lot of the typical ones? Oh, I'm gonna do this good thing for myself. I'm gonna eat healthier. I'm gonna lose weight. I'm going to join the gym. You know, I'm gonna read more. And a lot of the times, the resolutions they end up just sort of folding on us. And I think what Chesterton wants to try to do is have us sort of. I'm not sure if he was necessarily a man of New Year's resolutions. I couldn't say for sure, but to sort of think about the new year in the concept of something bigger to sort of move us away from what we may typically consider in the new year, and it's probably something more achievable and longer lasting than the diet fad you're going to try for the new year.
Right, right. And at the end of the essay, he talks particularly about thankfulness. Surprise, surprise. I think that's sort of uh, a really good thing to always renew every year. You can always renew your thankfulness, your wonder. I think he says, "Thank your feet for carrying you," or let me find the exact quote. Um, Resolutions to notice that we have feet and thank them with a courtly bow for carrying us. What a kind of sweet sentiment that is.
Right. I mean, and he's good about that, right? He's good about looking at the things that we sort of overlook and take for granted and says, make sure that you recognize a lot of these little things are just as important as some of those things that we think are huge and big.
Right. And some of the huge and big things that we take for granted and overlook. Earlier in the essay, he talks about the fact that time can actually, the arbitrary imposition of time can actually be a means of focusing us on what's really important. So if you're aware of the fact that you might lose something precious or that you have a limited time to enjoy it, that just by its nature sort of intensifies your gratefulness, your thankfulness, and your ability to wonder at it.
And again, that's really a lot like the other part that we read. Unless a man starts on the strange assumption that he has never existed before, it is quite certain that he will never exist afterwards. So that
Mm.
you know that daily dying, that daily restart, it's a death and a rebirth, and every day is that opportunity to work towards that end. But we have to recognize, that real great significance of the day, of our life, of time, working it all together and understanding the path that we are on.
Right. And sort of fortuitous that the new year comes at this time of year. Uh, It's for a lot of us, it's dark, it's cold, it's nasty. For the other hemisphere, it's probably hot and gross and not so great either in its own way. But it's sort of in the middle even of a season in a way. It's not even like necessarily at the beginning of spring, which, some cultures have celebrated the new year then. But the idea is that it doesn't really matter. This is a time when we, at any day that you wake up, Chesterton says, is a day that's good enough, that God has made, that is full of wonder. Right after that part that you read earlier, Albert, he says that the object of a new year is not that we should have a new year. It is that we should have a new soul and a new nose, new feet, a new backbone, new ears, and new eyes. It is that we should look out instantaneously on an impossible earth, that we should think it very odd that grass should be green instead of being reasonably purple, that we should think it almost unintelligible that a lot of straight trees should grow out of the round world instead of a lot of round worlds growing out of the straight trees. Such a glorious passage. He's so good. This is where Chesterton's artistry really comes into play. He's so good at painting pictures with words. The thought of worlds growing off of trees or purple grass, so vivid. But at the same time, there really is no reason that the grass shouldn't be purple. We truly can be thankful that it is green, and we can be amazed by the color of it, and we can be in awe of the beauty of it, even though it's grass and we step on it every day, maybe.
And I think that's a brilliant point that Chesterton makes. And this is all in the context of the new year. But again, this comes back to, this is a daily thing for us. Yes, we have this larger new year when the number advances by 1, but every day is an opportunity to go out and stare at the grass, to stare at the trees, to stare at the world, to stare at every small thing of the world and consider the things that maybe we just have not considered before. Whether it's ourselves, it's nature, it's other people, it's just as he said, the impossible earth. Like, really, I have these conversations with my wife all the time, and I really don't like sort of the massively science-based only theories on evolution, that everything just sort of, came into being without any sort of intelligent design. Like, I know there's some room for an understanding of some sort of regular evolution, but the fact that some random cells in the world decided we're going to be an orange tree, that sort of thing. Like, it's just,
you could say it magically happened.
Yeah, right. but it just, look at the world. It's almost impossible to sort of put everything of the world, especially us as humans, and to not sort of contemplate every new small nuanced detail and say, why is that the way it is? Why do we have 2 feet to be thankful for? Everything. And I think Chesterton really puts that in place. So we could do this every day. We don't have to wait 365 days to have these considerations. Every day is an opportunity to consider every new thing that surrounds us.
Yeah, I mean, and he says a new soul, a new nose, new feet, a new backbone, new ears, and new eyes. That kind of implies that all of your senses reawaken to the beauty that is around you. There's another amazing quote in another essay that I can't think of right now that Chesterton wrote, and he says something like, "We are still in the Garden of Eden. It's only our eyes that have changed." And I come back to that again and again when I'm feeling jaded. And honestly, if you just take a moment and look out your window, and I don't mean glance out the window, but almost anywhere you are, even in the most ugly city, if you just take a little time and just look, for a while at the same spot, I promise you will see something worth seeing. Uh, I've done it before, and it's amazing. Whether it's the light playing on a tree in a certain way, there is beauty out there everywhere to be thankful for that God has made, and He didn't have to make it that way. We could be living in a very drab and ugly place. We could have no color, all sorts of things. A neighbor of mine is colorblind, and he was able to see color for the first time with some special glasses, and he just cried. And I think that should be our experience every day when we look out our window. If we could muster that kind of gratitude, what a beautiful world we would appreciate, and how our hearts would kind of grow from that.
Going back to that paragraph that you were reading from that got us on to the last discussion we had, he goes on to say, the object of the cold and hard definitions of time is almost exactly the same as those of the cold and hard definitions of theology. It is to wake people up. And how many of us, sort of in a manner of speaking, are sleeping, right? We sort of sleep our life away, and we don't give considerations to the fact that either A, we're just not living our life to its fullest, that we're not giving sort of consideration to the pending death that awaits all of us. So we're just sort of basically going through the motions, and we're not taking the time to really consider that very cold and hard definition, of time and theology. And people need to wake up. We all need to wake up, and we're all guilty of this. At one point or another, or multiple times, we just sort of start coasting. We're not
just making it through.
Right. And we're not living our life, and we're not recognizing all of this around us. And Chesterton said it, it's time to wake up. And not just wake up to the new year, but sort of wake up to the new day, to the opportunities, the new life. What is it that God is trying to show us? We need to be able to wake up to all of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in the Bible. We hear a lot of it during the recently passed season of Advent. Wake, wake, awake. The watchman is calling. These ideas that if you sort of live your life asleep, you're going to miss it. And it's a kind of a strange thought that, like, maybe it would be possible to miss. People miss the coming of Christ the first time because they weren't paying attention. And it sort of makes you wonder, like, would you miss it if it happened again? Could you miss the second coming if you weren't aware enough? I have no one has
Of
any
course
idea.
of course you might. I mean, you might, if Jesus were to appear again, how many people, even people who are faithful Christians, would sort of ignore it, right? Because we don't let ourselves want to believe in the impossible, but yet we'll say that we believe in Christ, and we praise Christ for the amazing things that he has done, and the miracles and the healings and the people that he has brought to salvation over a period of about 2,000 years. We'll talk about all this, but then if Christ really appeared, how many of us would actually sort of wake up to Christ, or how many of us would just sort of sleep through it, and let it go? I think we'd be really surprised at how it would happen in the second coming of Christ, and who would say, like, okay, Christ is here, and people would be like, nah.
Or maybe it's the time to consider, who do you say that I am? You know what I mean? Like, is the Jesus in your heart the one that would actually come? Do you really and truly, look at the gospel and try to really know who that Jesus is? Or have you sort of built up in your mind a figure that suits your own purposes? Again, I know I've been guilty of this, but it's just sort of an interesting thought that in order to appreciate and to even experience the love that Christ has for you, you have got to be awake. You cannot be in a stupor. You can't be wasting your time. Oh, that's a scary thought. Yeah, but I think that's one of the great missions of Chesterton's life that echoes again and again. I mean, it's certainly in, let's say, the novel Man Alive. There's this need to be awake, to be awakened, usually by the thought of death, because the thought of the end of existence is often the thing that makes you most aware of existence itself. That just runs again and again through his writing, and this is sort of a nice little microcosm of that.
I don't think I am of a mindset yet to sort of say that I personally take the new year into consideration the way that Chesterton does. It doesn't mean that myself or anyone else is doing something terribly wrong by not doing the new year in a Chestertonian way, but I feel like it's a good reminder, and because I guess I don't want the audience to feel sort of pushed against the corner, like, hey, you better wake up, you better go out there and you better stare at the trees that don't have earth growing out of it, I I I I I want to feel just sort of encouraged, and I want the audience to feel encouraged that I think the point of Chesterton is not to sort of scare you into the new year, but to help us recognize that there's so much more to the passing of time than we give it credit for, because I think again, most of us just sort of it's a new year, we celebrate and December 31st, wait for 12 a.m. and we hoot and holler.
Woohoo, and then go to
Yeah,
bed.
right. And so you don't have to wake up on January 1st, and oh my gosh, I'm awake and I have feet and I need to be thankful for my feet and I need a new nose and a new soul and I need no I don't, it's not Chesterton obviously he speaks in such a wonderfully creative way, and I think really the takeaway is, hey, don't let time just go by in a very un undevoted sort of way. Like, devote yourself to considering the importance of time, whether it's for yourself, for others, considering the world that you live in on a daily basis, and really sort of consider it in a new way and try that, And yeah, it won't be perfect, I'm sure. Like, I'm not going to be perfect at it, but I'm glad to be reminded of the importance of what the new year can truly be for all of us.
That's actually a very, I had never thought of this, but that's another, yet another connection of Chesterton to the thoughts and philosophy of Saint Therese, because it reminds me of that the idea that you can do every little thing for God, and therefore it is significant, and therefore it is worth doing, and it's beautiful. And I think this is sort of a similar idea that nothing is too small to be appreciated, and to be no task is too small to be conducted with love. And again, knowing we're going to fall, but part of the journey is picking ourselves back up and making sure that we don't fall into despair over our failures, but we continue and we try again, and we never stop appreciating the world. Obviously, like Albert said, without getting anxious about it. But just I believe it was Thomas Merton who had a gratitude journal like almost his whole life, and he literally wrote something every day, something new that he was thankful for, which is astounding. Like, can you think of something new every day that you're thankful for, not something you've written before? Um, it's quite a challenge. But if you tried that this year, how would your life change? What would be different? What would you feel differently? Would you be able to appreciate things differently? I don't know. Might be worth doing.
I think one of the great payoffs for something like a gratitude journal could be the ability to look back at it, especially in the opportunities that present itself, like on a day where we feel really down, we feel like nothing good is happening, and say, okay, I'm going to take out my gratitude journal. And let's say it's June, you've gone halfway through the year and you're having a terrible day. You're like, this is just awful. And you go back and you are reminded of the daily gratitudes
Mm.
that you found. And suddenly you realize, I guess my life isn't really that bad.
You're pretty
And it's,
blessed.
yeah, you're pretty blessed in all of the things, from your head to your toes, to your job, to your house, to your family, to your friends, to the food on your table, to
To
the
the
ability.
ability to read Chesterton.
Yeah. So that's Gretlin's way of saying you should read more Chesterton. So please
You should
always read more
always read
Chesterton.
more Chesterton.
Always. I should read more Chesterton.
So should I. Always.
So yeah, I like that thought of being able to find the opportunity of gratitude. And of course we know Chesterton is a huge proponent of gratitude, of thanks, and it can definitely help in our journey of time that Chesterton presents to us.
Beautiful. Yeah. And keeps it from being an endless string of Tuesdays.
Right? Yeah. I mean, occasionally we're allowed to have a Wednesday or a Thursday or a Friday or
Or a
Saturday or
Sunday,
something.
God bless.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
I wanted to just sort of read the complete last paragraph because you took the part out at the end about, notice that we have feet, but I think I want to read the last paragraph sort of
Go
as
for
we
it.
approach the end here. Not the end of time, I'm sorry, the end of the show time.
We don't know.
Scare,
Maybe.
yeah, this is scare people. The end is coming. Well, at some point, but right now the end of our show is coming. So let me read this final paragraph. Of such dramatic renaissances, this New Year's Day is the great example. Doubtless, this division of time can be described as an artificiality, but doubtless also it can be described more correctly as a great artificial thing ought always to be described. That is, as one of the great masterpieces of man. Man has, as I have urged in the case of religion, perceived with a tolerable accuracy his own needs. He has seen that we tend to tire of the most eternal splendors, and that a mark on our calendar or a crash of bells at midnight, maybe, reminds us that we have only recently been created. Let us make New Year resolutions, but not only resolutions to be good, also resolutions to notice that we have feet and thank them with a courtly bow for carrying us. And I think he very neatly and poetically sort of wraps up the whole idea here is that we need to be reminded of, the wonderfulness of our world, the wonderfulness of our life, and that when we get tired of something really great, like he says, those eternal splendors, and a crash of bells should be an opportunity to remind us, wake us up, and say, there is much goodness
Hmm.
in our lives, in our world, and we need to refocus and start again.
Yeah. How often do we go to Mass and sort of sit there like it's nothing? How about that for a New Year's resolution? Try to see Mass as if you've never seen it before.
I like, you were talking about the placing of New Year's earlier, and I thought it was apt that New Year's tends to fall very shortly, almost within really a week of Christmas, right? And Christmas was this opportunity. You go into the church that has been sort of lit up for the celebration of the birth of our Lord, right? And that is a beginning, the birth of Christ, right? It's sort of it's like the best sort of shock of time, like the birth of Christ, right? His life, his beginning. And then we get to the new year. It's like, okay, here we are. We've celebrated the new beginning. What about you now? Now
What
you
are you
have
going to
your
do about
opportunity.
it?
Right. Yeah.
Amen. 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 Well, with that, we want to hope that you pick some beautiful New Year's resolutions, and we wish you all success in them. And may you be very blessed in this new year. And thank you so much for listening today, for joining us on Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. We'll have some great guests coming on the show this year. As always, we'd like to invite you to subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode of Uncommon Sense. And be sure to review us so that we can reach even more people in this bright new year of 2023. Again, thank you for listening. Happy New Year. And remember, Chesterton is always better with friends.